Good morning. Okay, this is a parable, and it is called the parable of the madman. A man walks into a crowded marketplace in the early morning with a lantern, and he shouts, "I seek God, I seek God." And people respond how you might expect. Strange looks, some people even laugh. But he keeps going and he shouts, "Where is God?" And he says, "We have killed him. Are we not plunging continually? Where are we moving? Is there no longer any up or down? Do we not have any direction anymore? God is dead, and we have killed him." He keeps shouting, "What now? How shall we comfort ourselves? How will we make up for this loss? Must we ourselves not become gods simply to become worthy of what we've done?" Everyone's silent now, including the madman himself. Then he says aloud, as if just coming to a realization, "I have come too early. This tremendous event, the death of God, is still on its way, still wondering. It has not yet reached the ears of men. This deed is still more distant from them than the most distant stars. And yet they have done it to themselves. They have killed God." This parable comes from Friedrich Nietzsche. It's found in his work, The Gay Science. It's one of his earliest published uses of that phrase. I'm sure you heard in the parable, and I'm sure you've heard elsewhere, that God is dead. Maybe you noticed in the parable that phrase he didn't mean exactly what we commonly think that it means. It's close, but there's nuance to it. In this parable and in other places where Nietzsche says this phrase, "God is dead," he's not making a comment about his personal belief in God or about atheism per se. What he's doing is he is diagnosing what he observes in society. He's saying God is dead in the sense that the role of God in society is no longer. And in this parable, we see that he's trying to prophesy this. In other words, he's seeing a trend toward God's non-existence in society. God is dead is a diagnosis of humanity and the role God plays in society. Okay, now, Nietzsche lived from 1844 to 1900. So you might ask, what about his society led him to make this proclamation? And he says it in many places. It is forever associated with him. Well, Nietzsche was an academic. Maybe you know this. He's firmly in the academy. He is in Germany during this period in the late 19th century. Now, this is a period of scientific advancement. Charles Darwin's theory of evolution, for many people, takes the place of Genesis as they think about the origins of living things. Philosophy, geology, physics, there are lots of discoveries, a lot of mysteries are being solved. Maybe we don't need to rely on God to answer all these questions, is perhaps the way that he was thinking. They're post-Enlightenment. So rational thinking, critical thinking, the way we approach things like problem solving and city planning and policy. A lot of changes are happening in the world. The second industrial revolution is underway. Religious communities are becoming less stable as people's obligations are more spread out. For centuries in Europe, the church was the end-all, be-all. The king was divinely chosen. The church dictated morality, civic life, and almost everything about public interactions. And so Nietzsche is writing during a major paradigm shift. Nietzsche says that God is dead. For him, all those reasons the church used to be at the center are no longer relevant. He observes a general feeling of apathy and malaise among people toward matters of the divine. People are simply not as passionate about God as they once were. So Nietzsche wants to push them past this, what he thinks is a temporary phase as God is dying, and encourages citizens to harness their own, what he calls will to power, that humanity can make its own rules, create its own values in a way that doesn't need God. But actually, never mind this future vision for now. What's interesting to me are the conditions that led him to this. The apathy toward God in the face of so-called human advancement. The conditions that caused the madman to shout, "God is dead." We've spent the past 2 weeks describing Jesus' parting message to his disciples the last night before he leaves them. We have considered the dashed dreams of the disciples who had hoped that Jesus would topple Caesar. Going a little bit further back, now this is the last Sunday of Easter, Ascension Sunday. Going a little bit further back, we've talked about how the disciples basically ran away when things got hard. They hid in a house. We've talked about how they must have felt when they thought they'd lost everything. And of course, while we're on the subject of God is dead, if we're going to put it bluntly, we've spent a lot of time with the disciples as they've grappled with what it means that the one who says, "I am in the Father and the Father is in me," has in fact died on the cross. I bet the phrase "God is dead" wouldn't have sounded so crazy to them during those 3 days. I graduated seminary in 2014, and that's when I started attending annual conference. You guys ever been to annual conference? You can nod if you have. It's much better now than it used to be. And that wasn't that long ago, 2014, but it used to be so intense because the denomination had not yet worked out its stance on the full inclusion of LGBTQ people. So it was a bloodbath, man. People would, my colleagues and my bosses, the district superintendents, and respected people in the denomination, they would just go at it. We would have a bunch of business, but everybody was waiting for the end, because at the end of every annual conference, there would be some kind of debate about the role of LGBTQ people. And so this is my first exposure to denominational happenings. You can imagine what that does to people when they're first starting out. Is it going to be like this forever? Well, there was one year where a seminary professor who was a lay delegate at annual conference, she made this Facebook post that everybody was passing around and seemed to sort of go viral, if you want to call it that. And she just said that every year it's the same thing. We spend the last day yelling and arguing about LGBTQ people, and then after that's over, we read the list of all the churches that have closed that year. Then we go home. And you can see her point. That division, that yelling, was not just isolated at annual conference in that room with those microphones. Something of it bled into churches. And sure enough, people left, and actually a lot of clergy left during that time. A lot of my friends left during that time. That was 2014. 2016, we had a presidential election that caught a lot of people off guard. And, you can just, regardless of your feelings about the election, it's like things got more intense in churches at that time. They just did. 2020, COVID, I don't need to go through the list. We've been through it enough. But it was like event after event where people were just like fighting to keep churches open. Every year, the Pew Research Center releases data on religious involvement in America. They'll ask questions like if you identify with particular religions, how often you go to worship, whether you believe in God, and what category you put yourself in. And increasingly, the most checked box was the none box, N-O-N-E, as in no religious affiliation. I didn't go too deep into the data, but pretty much since the mid-90s, there has been a steady decline in churches and church involvement, and that steady decline became sharp during the period I'm describing. Now, there was never a time when I would have said God is dead, but there have been times when it felt that way. Nietzsche was not correct, but I get where he was coming from. For a lot of people, the problems they were observing in society were not problems the church seemed able to solve. Take Nick, for instance. Not our Nick. A different person named Nick, who was featured in a New York Times story that was released this week. And the story was called, "Why More Americans Are Seeking Religion." You can look it up. I thought it was really insightful, and we'll talk a little bit more about the broader article in just a second. But Nick grew up in the church. He grew up Catholic, and for whatever reason, he became disillusioned and had some issues. And this is a common story for young people in the church in general, in all denominations. But they become disillusioned, and somewhere around high school, Nick decided that he did not want to be involved in church. And he actually developed what he says was an outright hostility toward the church in general. But the thing about Nick is that he is very service-oriented. He was interested in doing work that is good for society. And so he became a public defender, which is such an important role to be able to provide counsel to people who can't afford it. And he took on various activism roles. And it was important for him to pursue justice causes. And he had dedicated his life to this. Well, at some point during this period of sharp church decline that I'm describing, he had a bit of an epiphany. And the epiphany was that all of this work that he was doing, yes, it was important. Yes, it was changing some people's lives, but he had this epiphany that the work that he was doing by itself was not going to solve the deeper problem that we have in our country. It's not going to address the core issues of our society's collective soul. You understand? Here's his reflection about the epiphany. It kind of made me realize that without having a transcendent ideology that's grounded in something common for all of humanity, we inevitably fall into this us against them world. And that just seems very poisonous to me. So the alternative to that is a religion where we're all equal. We're all created in the image of God. And so that's what I felt like I needed. Do you get what he's saying? The starting place of Christian theology, and this is true for other religions too, is that all people are of equal worth, each with inherent dignity. Everybody is made in the image of God. He's having this realization. At the same time, it turns out that a lot of people are. To hearken back to the larger article, to the Pew Church data I mentioned, the data shows there is currently no longer a decline in church involvement. It's not like a full-blown revival. It's, for the time being, a kind of flattening out, so we ought not get ahead of ourselves. But we've seen for the first time since Pew Research has been gathering data on religion that people have stopped leaving. In essence, secularization is paused. That's what it says. Pew published a report that shows if you actually look at the youngest group of Americans, so like 18 to 23-year-olds, there are signs that that group is even more likely, and it's slight, but it's more likely to attend religious services at least once a month than those just older than them. It says, and then separately we got a different survey from Gallup that found a sharp rise in the share of men under 30 who say that religion is, quote, very important to them. It went from 28% in 2023 to 42% in 2025. The story mentions college chaplains who are noticing increased involvement in campus ministries. And you can ask Robert about that. He'll attest to it. And dare I say, here at College Place, we have borne witness to the Spirit stirring in young people's lives. You know, when we, months back, a few students started coming and they invited friends. And more came, and they started meeting down in the fellowship hall and participating in choir. And then the school year-end cookout we had last month was such a cool thing. We ran out of burgers. It was fun. We were unified in a common sacred purpose. Nick's experience is representative of something bigger. I think people are tired of the hate. I think people are thirsty for community. And the world can try as they might, but there's nothing like the church to bring people together from different walks of life for a common sacred purpose. We have our particular causes, our particular issues, but it's hard to see how ultimately it matters if everyone hates each other. Flourishing in any society must begin with a foundation of love in community. Today is Ascension Sunday. Historically, I haven't cared for today, to be honest with you. It's hard to make sense of it because the ascension isn't the resurrection. It is the end of the Easter season. What's there to say that hasn't already been said? Well, here's one thing the ascension teaches us. God isn't dead. God came to earth and entered the temporal world for around 30 years, and we thought we had killed him. But he overcame death, defeated the evil powers of sin, and returned to eternity in glory. Actually, we can't kill God because God is always and everywhere. Thanks be to God.